Hello, welcome to the SEO party. I'm Timmy. We have Naveed producing, and join us today is Ray Martinez. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, guys. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. A little under the weather, but fine
Yeah,
enough.
yeah. We all met up in Brighton, and when I got, when we wrapped up Brighton, it like suddenly hit me. I was like getting uh, flu-like symptoms,
It's,
and
it's yeah,
it's that leaving San Diego flu.
that
Yeah, I
mhm.
think so. I think that's
Like
what it
it
was.
waited till it was like, okay, we're done, and then the floodgates opened.
I mean, also that weather change. I mean, I'm up here. We're gonna hit our first 50-degree day since April, so not great on the East
Mm.
Coast.
Oh man.
Yeah, we are having a storm system come through, so it's been pretty gloomy outside. Cool though, but I'll take that over hot and humid.
Mhm.
But yeah. So Ray, thank you so much for joining, man. It's uh, uh I've known you for a long time now, so it's finally nice to have you on our podcast. So yeah, thank you for joining. I mean, we've known each other for quite a while, and I think, thank you for having me. Like, I've seen you guys go through evolutions of content and really focus on providing the industry with important, relevant information over time. So, I'm grateful to be a part of this. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, our my take was always, I want to bring on compelling guests where, the listeners get something meaningful out of this. And there's so many problems in the industry, from mental health to to how do you handle clients, right? Or to tackle this new AI craze that's going on, and rightly so. So yeah, yeah. So Timmy, over to you.
Yeah, over to me. Well, before we dive into anything specific, let's talk about Ray. For our listeners, who is Ray? What does Ray do?
So I'm Ray Martinez. I'm VP of SEO. I've been with Archer Education now for just under 7 years. In my role at Archer Education, my primary focus is on driving enrollments for universities or .edu sites across the web. And we do that through organic means. So, traditional SEO work. My background in SEO, I've been doing SEO now since 2010, 2011. I started in local SEO doing work on a website for a nightclub in the Lower East Side. That was the first time like getting exposed to SEO. I've been agency side now for about 11 years now, since 2015. I worked at a small shop in San Diego, which actually, had me working with folks who've like proliferated and gone on to other agencies. So have lots of connections across all the Southern California agencies as well as some of the national ones. Um, but for the past decade or so, my primary focus has been higher education. Really, how do we take the leap from focusing on organic traffic to driving a more responsible cost per acquisition for university partners, as well as, focusing on butts and seats, making sure that our university partners can actually enroll the right number of students so that programs are profitable, so that they're, seeing that reduced cost, and that reducing in cost of spend will then proliferate forward to our prospective students who get a reduction in tuition rate. So, that's kind of who I am in a nutshell. Just been focusing on SEO for a long time, specifically in higher ed. My mantra is, I want to make sure that everyone has access to education. Yeah, Ray, could you talk about SEO in the education space? Because it was, they were late adapters to SEO, right? I'm assuming. So could you talk about how, like, what it was, like how it was done before, and how things have changed? Because I've certainly noticed, right? So it'll be interesting to learn about that. Yeah, I think SEO was like any other business in the space. So when we look back to like those HubSpot studies from about like a decade ago, where they would talk about like only 30% of businesses across the web invest in SEO, right? Higher ed, I think that, was about half of that. And, a lot of their website builds are, are operated through centralized either marketing teams or centralized tech teams. So there was a lot of focus on the curriculum aspect and the actual conferment, so meaning the actual degrees themselves, but not a whole lot of focus on how are our prospective students finding this content and information. So there was a very large gap there. And, throughout the history of higher ed, what we've seen are, there were organizations called OPMs, online program management companies. Like back in the day, we used to have Pearson online learning services. There were Wiley Education, 2U, Noodle, all these larger sort of OPMs. What they realized that there was a large gap between universities being able to launch online programs and being able to market them efficiently and market them at scale. So they stepped in um, to help universities out through revenue share, and sharing profits off of programs. But that's in recent years fallen out of vogue. And also what's happened is there are more players in the space. More folks are coming in and competing and understanding the importance of driving website traffic. I'd say within the last 5 years, there's been a real uptick in universities, going straight to agency and looking for that additional online help, so that they are thinking about like the impact of organic. And just from like an industry benchmark standpoint, when we look at like paid conversion rates, from a lead to enrollment perspective, that's around like anywhere from 4 to 8%. But when we look at organic, that number usually sits around 15%. So a much higher enrollment rate on the organic side. And I think universities have gotten wise to that and have now started investing in the organic side because of that.
That's so interesting. And it's one of the things that I was reading your article on Wix, where you talk about the 6 practical steps brands can take to craft a narrative from numbers. Even there was a case study on there too, which I believe did a measurable lift in impressions, clicks, and user acquisitions. I think I'll be like interested to learn about like some of the points that you can provide our viewers a summarized view of how they can approach storytelling using data and stats.
Yeah, I think, I love that piece, by the way, because I think I think it's unique to my story and kind of my path. When I first started in SEO, I remember analytics being like my weakest area and not understanding the metrics. There were so many things to measure, and I was like, how do I go about measuring that? And what I've just learned is, right, like understanding each individual KPI and defining that for yourself, for your team. And then, also speaking with your partner and having real clear conversations. Um, you know, One of the things that I like to think about from like a data story standpoint really is, you know, do you know what progress looks like? Do you know what success looks like? And, my first sort of recommendation to any sort of marketer in the space is define success. I think oftentimes we think of the word success and we're like, oh yeah, we know what that is, but it's such a subjective word where, we may say success is us bringing X amount of leads, where our partner may say, well, you know, that doesn't really matter. How many butts and seats did those leads bring, and how many applications were submitted and how many of those turned into enrollments. So yeah, I think part of that, defining success and understanding that success, then reverse engineering that and thinking back to like, okay, what are my key performance indicators and what do each of those things mean in a broader sense, so that you're taking each of those data points and you're connecting them back. Like I like to call it the student journey. My teams really focus on the student journey. What are the points in which our prospective students are finding our programs, and connecting KPIs back to that. I think also for us, well, for me personally, I look to understand, right, like where are what's going on with my internal stakeholders. So a lot of times, SEOs, we like to operate in a silo, and we think of things in terms of like, impressions, clicks, users, rankings, and those types of superficial metrics. But there could also be other things, and one of the examples I used was a D1 university, that saw a national championship. And during that national championship run, on Saturdays, and they would see these huge spikes in clicks, and it would be easy for organic to say, look at this organic traffic that we drove. Like the reality was those clicks were coming from the fact that this university had banners pointing back to their online site on nationally televised games. So they'd see these large swings because people were being prompted and compelled to search for their brand because they were seeing it online. It was on national television. It was on ESPN. So it drove a lot of branded search. I've also seen, partners where, in a month, organic, all of a sudden we'll see, we go from 200 leads a month, 300 leads a month to all of a sudden we have 1,000, and we're like, oh yeah, we're crushing it. But the reality is our partner had a lead dump. They have a partner program or a community program that, annually enrolls programs or enroll students from these programs, and they get a large lead list that they upload manually to their CRM. So, that sort of having that sort of insight, and being able to speak to your internal stakeholders as well, puts together much more of a real story on terms of what's going on. And when you have that story, damn it, I mean, everything
Noise.
that's going. Hold on, let me pause notifications here. I'm sorry, guys.
That's okay.
This is a rough one today.
Everything that can go wrong.
It did go wrong. Oh yeah, we may have to redo this, but I think part of it, right? Like it's having those real world conversations in terms of what's going on with your partner, so that you're just not operating in a silo and you're not operating out of context. And in higher ed, our sales team, for example, that closes our lead because we're a long sales cycle product. We have an admissions team that's working with prospective students to close them. And so like having conversations with our admissions team to understand what are student objectives and building out like content around that. And, having those deeper detailed conversations so that we're providing our prospective student with the right sort of information that they're actually looking for. And I think, that's part of that story. It's like, what is the data telling us, and where are the gaps? And, are we collecting enough data, not just only from our analytics platforms, but from our internal and external stakeholders as well?
That's interesting. And the article, I love the the part about where you broke down the visualizations aspect of it. It makes such a huge difference. I do that, and I actually, was doing that without even reading your article. Could you talk about the importance of that? And I loved how you mentioned that it makes it more accessible, right? I think like touching on the importance of that, I think would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, right, like what I wanted to convey was like, the reality is our reports you should be able to look at it and know what we're trying to say. Right. I think oftentimes we have so many metrics and so many things that we're measuring that reports can get pretty convoluted relatively quickly and obscure what actual progress or what's actually happening. And, a lot of that goes back to, are we using the right sorts of charts, tables, and other illustrations to make that point? I think a pie chart that just says percentages without context, that's acontextual on the page or in a report, doesn't really do much. But if we have the right sort of compelling visualization there, looking at things like a bar chart, or especially when we think about like the use of like AI and chat GPT, which we can make some really compelling visuals now. We can have things like dancing bar charts and all that stuff that comes through from from Python scripting, so that we're creating, more meaningful measurement of data that gives insights, right? And one thing I've been doing recently a lot of is like using Python to create heat mapping. I've been taking, our paid keywords and our organic keywords, and I've been mapping those together and saying, hey, what's the relevancy between both of these, and where are the gaps? And just for my teams, so that we can understand, like, hey, here's where we're hot, here's where we're cold. Those sorts of heat maps and visualizations have been pretty helpful in us driving strategy forward. I think it's assessing the right situation, and under going back to the overarching story, and say, what is that story, and what is the visualization that's going to best illustrate this. And I wanted to break it down, all those different sorts of like elements that we can add in a page, because I think a lot of people just use them and never really think about the true meaning of them. Like, what's the difference between a stack chart versus, a plain bar chart? And, especially when we're comparing segments, right? Like we can stack those, we can see, and actually one of the tools that I personally like, I've used Ahrefs for a long time. I think they do a really good job with their keyword charts of using like stacked bar charts to really show progress over time. And then we can see like, their ranking changes from 1 to 100. Well, we could have seen that. But I think, that sort of visual is compelling. It's something that shows, progress over time, and our partners get it instantaneously, right? And so that's what I'm trying to do, because I think a lot of this stuff is very in the weeds, especially in higher ed. Like, we are dealing with subject matter experts that are subjects in their field, but they don't really understand marketing as well. And so if I'm having to explain the exact power of nav boost, I'm losing. Like, I'm going, if I'm going that far into the weeds of explaining the technology in the stack, then I'm not getting I'm not hitting the right sort of notes, and not showing the right sort of impact. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So Ray, what's your take on vectorizing keywords, and if you can explain vectorizing keywords?
Yeah, it's funny, because like if you would ask me this like about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I'd be like, what the hell is that? But like, I think for us, right, like vectorizing keywords is essentially we're taking an individual word and we're turning it into a mathematical representation. And for me, right, like once I got it and understood, like, okay, here's the process of crawling, turning it into a vector via a JavaScript that a JavaScript script that's hooked up to, like, let's say ChatGPT API, and we're able to turn that individual word into a mathematical representation. And then we're looking at it in relation to all the other words that are also mathematical representations on pages. We're able to create things like similarity scores, or see the differences, or understand, all right, you know, going beyond just, there were tools out there back in the day that would give us like co-occurrence and things like that, and would measure those things. Well, I think these are measuring semantic relevancy, meaning how relevant are they from an actual mathematical standpoint. And there are different models in doing so. You can have like cosine similarities, or card similarity, all those different types of ways to measure. But what they really do is they provide us an insight into, are we telling the right story on page? Are we hitting the right sorts of notes? So we're no longer guessing as much. And I think, it's a really powerful way for us to take our content and really take stock of it, and understand, how are LLMs ingesting this? How are they viewing the relationships between our pages, our words on page, versus what our prospective student or our user is actually looking for? I also think it's a helpful tool to help SEOs prioritize, right? I think oftentimes we have these large content strategies which are driven by, of course, industry knowledge, but a lot of it's intuition based. And now we have a much more data driven approach, where we have mathematical representations of these words saying here's the map and here's the closeness of these. And because we see this vector, you may want to also consider this vector. So it really helps us flesh out a much more detailed, comprehensive content strategy that allows us to cover a larger subset of topics at much greater depth.
And I think Rand also pointed that out in a couple of articles that I read from him as well. And he directly said as well that the best way to achieve success in the digital space is to combine the power of organic search and paid advertising, right? So it is really effective in identifying the gaps and overlaps between the two, right? So that's really interesting. So right, so let's talk about GEO, right? So there's this narrative right now building that GEO is an SEO or a mirror image, and that GEO is just rebranded version of SEO. People in social media are saying that the strategic gaps between the two are often not perceived as different. I think even Lily Ray put out that on Twitter. That LLMs are even though LLMs are more proficient in answering queries directly, they still rely on search engines to extract their data. This means that unless you're indexed in Google, Bing, or Yahoo, you can't possibly get cited in the AI answers. So, to what extent do you agree with this, and with the idea that GEO and SEO are the same?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a hot take here.
I know you will.
I think Lily Ray is also talking about answer engine optimization as well.
Yeah.
So it's their acronym, and I think a lot of folks are posturing and trying to put their mark on search. I look at GEO as a layer on top of traditional SEO. I don't look at it as a completely different thing. I do think that it's built, but I think it's built off of the foundations of traditional SEO. But we have new technology and we have crawlers that operate in a similar way, but we also have new standards which we can adopt, right? I think a lot of folks rely on that traditional Google search, but I want to say let's say schema markup, for example, right? A lot of folks think about schema and they think about the Google rich results test, which said there were only certain types of schema that they would accept. A lot of the schema types were deprecated, but the reality is schema.org has thousands of different types of markup. And in higher ed, we were using, a while ago, we were using different types of schema that were deprecated or not accepted or not validated by rich results, which would still get us an output and change in SERP. Like we used a site link schema, which would create a table for us on the SERP. And a lot of large publishers and the aggregator sites in the .edu space would use this sort of markup to really highlight different programs in a table directly on the SERP, right? And I think that piece just goes moving it forward, right, to now. We have all these different types of schema markups that fall outside of the purview of Google search, where we can provide all sorts of information. And for me, I think about it from a .edu perspective, right? Like a lot of programs don't necessarily have tuition or cost per credit directly on a program page, and that's by design. Sometimes there may be friction that introduces friction in the buying process for a prospective student, but we also don't want it to be hallucinated by LLMs. So it's a new, unique problem that isn't specific to traditional SEO. And on my LinkedIn, I actually dropped an example of this because I also teach at University of Florida. So on my first day of class, I was finishing my calendar for my students, and I was like, "When is the last day of class?" So I asked Google. AIO gives me one answer; it's incorrect. I switched to AI mode; it gives me another answer, which was incorrect. I switched to Gemini, which gives me a third answer, and that was incorrect. And then I switched to Chat GPT, which gave me another answer, and that was incorrect as well. So I think about myself, right, who is a experienced searcher who can find the correct information because I'm also a faculty member. I know exactly where to go. But then I think about my current student who's on a deadline, right?
Mhm.
Like who is in an anxious state, who is then also, scrambling to get something done. How does this affect them, right? And why did this happen? And part of it, is the way that UF lists their dates, and it's not necessarily accessible through static HTML on a page, which creates all sorts of obfuscation around. So we have to think about these things, right? These are real world case examples, right? So that's an example where traditional search didn't get the job done. Traditional search actually let us down.
Mhm.
And going through the LLMs, right, which are scraping traditional search, they got the wrong answer too. So we need ways to influence these outputs a bit more. My team and I, we tested a LLMS.txt just with the sheer thought of, is anyone actually going to crawl this and use it? Right? Like this is a standard that no one's really adopted. No one's openly said, hey, we're going to look at this thing and we're going to crawl it. And we were just like, hey, what if we do? And what we found was, yeah, OpenAI crawls it a lot. When I released my article back in July, what we were able to see was, pre-training for ChatGPT 5.
Yeah.
And OpenAI pinging that file every 15 seconds. And then they deployed GPTBot, which we know they don't deploy it as high a rate as SearchBot. And the reason they're doing that is because, they're not Google. They can't operate at scale. So they have to create their own crawl budget efficiencies. They also have to, think about the resources they're deploying. And I was scoffed at, but bringing it back to like Brighton SEO, there was I forgot the gentleman's name, but from Jet Octopus, he gave a talk on AI agents, what they crawl and why they crawl it. And it showed exactly that. GPTBot, was deployed at a much lower rate. And part of that goes directly to LLMs not having the depth of resources that a Google does.
Mhm. Google's
Right?
huge.
And Google's huge. Google has twiddlers. They have all sorts of modifiers. They can understand sites, unstructured data. They can do all these things really well. So of course they won't need LLMS.txt, but what about these other systems? Google has a 30-year head start in terms of crawling, 20 some odd year head start in terms of crawling the web and understanding and parsing information on the web from a crawl. How many patents, when I think back to like someone like Bill Slawski, this is exactly what he was talking about with a lot of these patents. How many patents does Google own that makes them gives them a huge competitive advantage, even over Bing, who's been in this industry for a long time? Right? Like,
Mhm.
so we need to be a lot more explicit with our outputs for these new systems. And we know, even though like right now, I think the last number I saw was like only 3% of searchers are searching on like a chat GPT. It was something relatively low like that. And like a small shift in market share, but more people are adopting it. Right. And if that's a part of our journey, of our user's journey, of a buying journey, of an action journey, then we need to be there. And we need to think about the best ways and most efficient ways to shape the outputs there. And I think a lot of what the rest of SEO's done is just argue over semantics.
Yeah, I agree.
Whether it be search everywhere optimization, answer engine optimization, I don't care what it's called.
Yeah.
Like I call it GEO because my CEO calls it GEO.
Mhm.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
other deans and provosts are calling it GEO. New York Magazine's calling it GEO. Right? So the more we try to deny it, the more citations we create around the term and solidify it and cement it as an actual thing.
Yeah. I think all those are really good points.
So like, if it really wasn't a thing, maybe we should just stop talking about it altogether.
Yeah.
Be a good conversation. Keep the conversation going. So with our, how would you advise our listeners approaching GEO and LLMs?
I think, the biggest thing is to bring it back to the basics of information retrieval, right? understand how this technology works. If you understand the underlying technology, things won't be a mystery, right? Like, I also think about, like, we keep hearing buzzwords like fan out, chunked content, right? I think continuous content strategy in which we are trying to measure in new ways by things like vectorizing our content and understanding relationships there, but also ideating and leaning into people and leaning into actual questions our users are looking for or looking to answer. We're gonna win when we're thorough, when we're thinking about content from an original perspective, and we're not just regurgitating the same old sort of content. We're going to win because we're providing the additional context that's needed to be cited. Right? Like, when you go on Chat GPT and you look up, is LLMS.txt being crawled? Archer Education's a source. My article's a source. And the reason why is we provided unique original data there. We were able to craft that data and say here, and it was ingested relatively quickly. And I have the bot pings, right? Like, I published an article on July 23rd, and on July 24th, we got a visit from GPTBot. And then by the rollout of Chat GPT-5, which is about a week later, we were memorialized. We were in the model we were trained on.
Mm-hmm.
With no additional modalities, right? So it wasn't SearchBot going out there looking to, perform a live search and rely on an index. It was model training on content. And our bot pings showed us that. That's behavior. It's observed behavior. It's not a grandiose claim. And I think, another piece is, and I've spoken to other SEOs that are doing this. It's observe these bots, observe these behaviors. Because a lot of these each LLM operates slightly different. Like, I've noticed different bot behavior. Like Perplexity, what they're hitting, they're not hitting LLMS.txt. They're hitting your robots.txt, and then they're ignoring the hell out of it. Right? They will go and gather content at any cost, because for them, content is the lifeblood which makes their model unique and able to offer, the right sort of answer or the right sort of output for their user.
You're you got a workshop coming about this too, right? I remember seeing that.
Yeah, and so that workshop, we're really speaking about the power of brand activity, right? I think, there's a component here from the GEO side. There's like this technical aspect where we're looking at the background of bot pings, but then there's also things like that we should be doing. And, shout out to Ram Fishkin, because he's been talking about this for a long time, but,
Mm-hmm.
it's that digital PR aspect. We call it academic thought leadership. So it's the way in which we work with universities to really highlight some of the work that they're doing and the expertise they have in their spaces. But, brands that are active
Mm-hmm.
and are recognized entities and are consistently getting in brand mentions, those are the brands that are going to be cited.
Yeah, and there's so many perspectives going around AI optimization, and there's this discourse. It can be contradictory at times as well, with whether schemas work or how not to get LLMs rank you. It's, thinking about these differences, and according to your observation, what tactics actually make LLMs pick your website? Like, I've yet to get like a convincing argument, because it's massive. Like, everybody's talking about it, but I've never walked away from, okay, you know what, that makes sense. Because even in our experiments, we come across so many different variables, and it's not consistent. It's consistent for certain types of things, but it ends up being random if you're really trying to replicate or trying to make sense of it. So what's your take on that? Like, what makes LLMs pick your website over Timmy's?
I think, right, like, for me, when I think about it from like a .edu context, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
It's that brand activity piece. What I see is a huge gap between these smaller institutions which are not as active, and I've seen small institutions which are active, are getting mentions, are working with their community, are building out those partnerships for their prospective students, as well as doing a lot of marketing activity beyond just SEO. Um, those brands are winning, right? And I think about like the top tier D1 or R1, and R1's a research institution, right? Those institutions that get lots of citations, lots of brand mentions because of either their work or their sports team, those brands are winning. They're taking the lion's share. And so to me, that speaks to just being active, right? And being known in your community. And it's almost like we've gone back to that billboard approach, right? Like, that passive impression really driving marketing activity. And it's so important, right? Like going back to LLMS.txt and that piece I wrote, I got yelled at by half of SEO on my LinkedIn post.
Yeah.
But like, thank you guys. Like, thank you for yelling at me, because that actually encouraged, in my hypothesis is that, between us having a file there, showing the freshness, between us, me speaking about it on social media and getting yelled at and getting lots of activity, right? That activity
Mhm.
pointed as a sign for the bot. It's like, oh, wait a minute, something's going on here, right? And I think if we can be active across our channels, um, as well as communicate across our channels with each other, so that we're not all operating in silos, but rather we're all amplifying each other's work, that's going to go much further um, in this new sort of search landscape, right? Where social signals back in the day were just a suggestion, right? We know that Google's looking at click data on page. They're looking at the popularity of a post. They're looking, they're looking at things like pogo sticking, which they said, previously, like, oh, bounce rate, that doesn't affect anything. But like, we know they're looking at the popularity and the importance of it. And so, the more engagement you can drive with a post, to me, and that speaks to compelling, original, unique content, right? And it all goes back to this content piece. Do you have the right sort of content, or is your content derivative of other pieces of content? And I think the derivative style of content is going to fall by the wayside. I think if you're not offering unique value in your content, then it's simply not going to be cited, unless you have a ton of citations externally around that and you're known as a thought leader. But then again, that goes back to a historic brand presence.
Mm. Gotcha. Man, I saw your podcast with Jeremy Rivera, Unscripted. I think that was brilliant. I had so much to take away from, and I meant to text you about it too. But there was quite a lot of stuff that you guys covered there. And you know what I find interesting, and I want to kind of get your take on that, because I can talk about just that podcast itself, but you talk about the EDU manipulations and Google's response. And there's one thing that you said, that Google is they won't they're hesitant to penalize, I think was a thing, penalize educational institutions, where so I'm assuming you're thinking that Google will never uh, give a manual action penalty to a .edu domain. Like, could you elaborate on that? I kind of I was curious about.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's where we have some fun there. Like
You did, yeah.
like, I think for it's just simple, right? Like, Google's trying to avoid regulation.
Hmm.
I think that may change in this landscape. Right now regulation is not in vogue and is not something that is focused on at a federal level. Um, but yeah, Google doesn't want to, why kick the hornet's nest? But what they will do is they will suppress your traffic up to 90%, right? Like,
That's it, yeah.
they if you're, I've literally, and going back to that interview, I talked about it. I've seen sites where they had a no index on their homepage and Google was still serving their homepage from a supplemental index.
Hmm.
I've literally seen that before. Like,
Hmm.
doing my digging and doing an initial audit of a site and seeing that, and I'm like, wow, And I think it just speaks to Google understanding that this is a known entity and people are actually looking for this thing. And it goes beyond just another site that's just doing business. These are degree programs which people are actually looking for and actually have reputation around. So they don't want somebody else to go out. I also think there's a piece where they don't want a user to leave and go out and look for it elsewhere. Right. So Google's
Mhm.
going to supplement that index and provide a page there. But yeah, I think the biggest deterrence is regulators. Why put yourself in the sights of regulators when you don't have to?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's clear as day. Like there was just another round a couple weeks ago, um, of a bunch of spam edu cracks. So apparently, like there was like an SSL cert hack where if or like a DNS hack or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Um, that you could take over a subdomain, a
Mhm.
delegated subdomain. Um, and so when when you look at things like CBD gummies, for example, you'll see a bunch of .edu sites ranking for it, and I think it speaks to the proliferation of an authoritative domain that Google is hesitant to penalize because of that, and because helpful content as well as site reputation abuse, it wiped out a bunch of sites, right? Site reputation abuse in particular, but it didn't wipe out all those.
I Yeah, it's interesting, man. I recommend users, our listeners, checking out. We'll leave a link of for that podcast, because it was quite a lot of stuff in there. Um, I'm gonna shift the conversation to our favorite subject, link building. And we hear questions, you've probably heard them too. What's your take on the efficacy of it, like in this day and age? Like, is it still relevant? Does it still work? And what's the approach on them?
I would say I liken link building to citations to a research paper, right? Like really good citations from other research papers make your research much greater because it's
Mm-hmm.
showing people are actually engaging and interacting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think also contextually, right? Like when we think about things like anchor text, they matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anchor text matters
Absolutely.
for link discovery. It provides a context signal around the document that a crawler is going to access. And I think link building is just as relevant as it always has been. But I do think the requirements of what is a valuable link has shifted. And I do think, y- Google's gotten a lot pickier with links. Like when we look at Search Console and we compare Search Console numbers versus a tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush, you'll see a large discrepancy. And it's not that Google hasn't found these links. It's that they're going to discount the links that they can. And I think, that gets more and more stringent, but I always think that if there are places where we can drive relevant referral traffic back to our site and we're earning that link there, that's always going to matter. If we're able to find content that's relevant to, in my case, a program, right? Or an outcome of a program, that's going to matter. And it still does matter because we see the link index and pass, and we see our organic ranking and visibility increase with that link building. And while it's correlative, the correlation still continues and proliferates and moves forward.
It does, and I also think that a lot of people don't understand that, what differentiated Google with, back in the day, from Yahoo and Ask Jeeves, was how they had, set their entire algorithm, which is based on links, and that was the biggest thing. Obviously, yes, there was people learn how to manipulate that and stuff, and it's got a lot more advanced, but there's absolute value, because we do it, like, our collaboration that we do, and with countless of the customers, there's if you draw the line between ethical and the strategic line between earning a meritorious link, that has so much value. And I it's yeah, thank you for kind of supporting that as well. And it's interesting how the how it's changed, because there's always this um connotation associated with it, but it's there's if done right, it could, I mean, sky's the limit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and for context, when I started on the agency side, I was doing link building,
Hmm.
uh, the really terrible link building, like I don't know if you guys remember the niche directories back in
Yeah.
the
Oh
you had
yeah.
long old lists, and so like you know. eh, That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking
Hmm.
about like, hey, what is the best way to provide that offsite context around your document? And Google's still looking for that, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, here's this anchor text. Let's see what this is talking about. And wait a minute, it's not, if we spam the hell out of a bunch of really crappy domains and we have a bunch of like like exact match anchor text on there, of course it's not going to matter. But if we're really thoughtful about our targets, if we're building relationships with sites and we're able to ethically acquire those links, of course it's going to matter. Why wouldn't it matter? We're able to drive referral traffic. Yeah, it's something that's hard to ignore. And I think a lot of folks will posture and say, oh, I didn't build a single link. But what they don't talk about is their brand has a million links pointing back to it with lots of context and references to the work that they do. So there's a context there that was already absorbed and acquired through a foundational link backlink profile, right? Like
Hmm.
that didn't it just you just didn't become magic overnight. Like it just didn't happen. Like, no, you've built this over time. That's actual equity that you've built into your brand, and that the rest of your content, your new content, is continuously benefiting from, right? Like if I have
Hmm.
more areas to discover my site out there from a backlink standpoint, then I'm going to influence the crawl rate. Like we forgot about that very foundational piece, right? Like when we first started building links, it was to get our site crawled more frequently so that, yeah, we were passing page rank, but we were also influencing the number of crawls on our site, right? We were trying to influence crawl budget to go from 5 crawls in a day to 100 crawls in a day to 1,000 crawls in a day, so that Google continuously crawls and is able to position our content. And we were able to move through Google storage system so that we're being put in the top 10 blue links, right? That's the foundational historical value of link building. And I think that still continues to this day.
Nice. So, Ray, a little bit of a hypothetical for you. So, if you were advising a small um, local college and its marketing department is well, small but mighty, and they can only perform one SEO task for this year, what do you think is the single most effective thing that they could do that could have a meaningful impact?
Yeah. So I'm gonna cheat here, right? I think because I think part of it, right, it's like I would focus on the on page, right? So is my content right? Do I have the right sort of internal links so that I'm I have discoverability and the right sort of anchors internally? But then I think if I had budget for one external task, it'd be link building,
Mhm.
right? Like if I'm a small team, I can control the content on my site already. I'm already doing that. But do I have the right sort of amplification? So it's either, for me, it'd be either, we're doing some external link building or we're doing some digital PR.
Nice. So, Ray, when you're not being awesome at SEO, what else do you like to be awesome at, or strive to be awesome at? What else do you like?
I make music actually. I
Oh
do
yeah,
a
okay,
bit of music. Yeah. So I make beats and stuff like that. And, um, but really my focus right now has just been on self-improvement every day. Like today I'm doing a Hispanic Heritage Month run in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. So I like to do all sorts of like just different community activities. I'm Puerto Rican,
Mhm.
raised on the island, and I've really just been focusing on being in community.
That's awesome. Um, d- is there some place where we can find your music? Uh,
You
Is
could
it
find me.
available?
Yeah, you could find me on Spotify, Apple Music. My artist name is Raymond Angelo.
okay.
Okay.
All right.
So I have about 3 songs released on there right now. There'll be more coming soon. I'm actually working on a project that I plan on releasing within the coming months. So
Awesome.
Nice.
Are you getting samples from Tyler? Because he's a proficient musician, you know.
I got Tyler's stamp of approval on one of them. So
That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
he is a prolific musician, and it's funny because like most of my SEO team is pretty creative in their own artistic endeavors. So I think that creativity piece is a nice outlet for all of us.
It is.
Mhm.
I've actually met and I know you, right? So I know other SEOs who share the thought process, are intuitive, have think outside the box, and I'm surprised at how many of them create music or are musicians as well. So I'm kind of curious. I'm gonna do a poll, find out, because I've met way too many. Like in Brighton, we went out to dinner with I think like 8 people, and half of them were musicians, and none of them knew each other. So they were all from different parts, and they were all hardcore SEOs. And I asked them like, "Hey, well, what do you do?" It's like, "Oh, I make music. I do
Mm.
this, I do that." So it's kind of interesting.
It's pretty wild, really. I mean, I'm over here watching Mike King go in the studio with Scott Storch. He's the guy who did like the piano on Still Dre
Oh
for
wow.
Dr. Dre.
Uh-huh.
Like, like, yo, the guy who did the beat for like Lean Back.
Hmm.
Like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? So like it's pretty crazy when you think about like how many, like Lily Ray DJs all over New
Oh,
York City
oh
want to
yeah.
roll.
Yeah.
I was gonna bring up Lily Ray too. Yeah, she's probably the best case. I think it makes sense though, because you have to be a good SEO. That you have to have that creative aspect. Yes, there's a box, and you follow the instructions and stuff. But then if you don't have that creativity to to siphon off, so I think it plays a big part. I think
Mm.
creatives make really good SEOs. I firmly believe that.
Yeah, I think strategic thinking and creativity go hand in hand.
Hmm.
I think good strategists
Hmm.
are looking for creative solutions to problems.
Hmm.
So it just spawns that sort of like they kind of feed into each other.
Precisely. Yeah. No, that's amazing.
Yeah, I feel that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
creative a little bit.
Yeah. We create stuff. Well, I mean, it's because it allows you to, um, like because you're actively looking at things in different ways and how you can change things. So whether it's a piece of music or a painting or um, keywords, you can look at it differently.
100%. Like, so, going back to my team member, Tyler, right? Like he's been in bands, he's done all sorts of music in Southern California. And, I've known him now 7 years, and he's been talking like some of the stuff that we're seeing today, like
Hmm.
Tyler was talking about 7 years ago, just because he's such a, you know, deep thinker
Hmm.
and has such a creative mind. I think he saw a lot of these trends early. And, I think that just goes back to his who he is as a person, and his ability to think beyond just this moment here.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's a differentiating factor. Absolutely. I remember when the videos that we created on YouTube and stuff, and we were doing our table talks and getting creative here and there, but we're like, hey, let's do something different, and we made a video on treating a website like a story, like how to tell a story, right? So
Mm.
we went back to different uh, you know like the hero's journey, and we made that video, and it ended up being like one of the best, and that kind of was a massive change for us in terms of how we're approaching content and how we're doing that. So we started having fun with it. We did a video that was all it was answering a very simple question, but it had penguins with guns. We put explosions in there. We were and we we took everything that we've learned, and we're making short films, and put everything to use. And now I'm so happy that every time we're at a conference, or people come up to us and say, "Dude, your content's amazing." We come in and it's
I
like,
remember you showing me the first videos you guys were doing. I think that was back in like 2021.
yeah. So it's so and the gratification you get out of it, when it's done. And sure, it gets views and it gets likes and engagements, but just the satisfaction that you get, like, oh my God, we did something awesome. And yeah, that makes me really happy. So,
It does. It's I think that's part of the process. It's like it's like a site launch, right? Like
yeah.
compare it to like a site launch, right? Like it's done. Like this thing that was continuous action and planning and thought and care and crafting.
hmm
You have a finalized product
hmm
here in front of you that you made, and that's deep satisfaction for
It
sure.
is.
I know when I finish a song, like I shamelessly listen to my own music. Like I will listen to my own because I'm like, damn, like I created that.
Oh yeah. I know we do that too. We sometimes
Yeah.
like pull up a video that we made. It's like, oh, this is so awesome. I can't believe you did that. Um, uh, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, like, I get a kick out of watching me shoot penguins,
yeah.
not real ones. No penguins were harmed.
Mm.
But I think that seems like it's a good place to wrap things up. Ray, thank you very much. But before we go, this is a wonderful opportunity for a shameless plug. What are you up to? How can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Ray Martinez SEO. It's LinkedIn/Ray Martinez SEO. That URL pulled me up. You can find me on Twitter, Ray Martinez SEO. And also, if you like, tune into, I have a GEO academic thought leadership, free workshop that we're doing at Archer for our .edu partners. That's going to happen October 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. You can go on LinkedIn. It's on my LinkedIn. You can hit the register button. Look forward to seeing y'all there.
Yeah, we leave a link for all of that in the description and on the screen as well. So
Cool.
Wonderful. Ray, thank you so much.
Timmy, Naveed, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate the effort to just talk shop.
absolutely, man. We need to do this again. Alex couldn't be here. He co-hosts our show. He had so many questions, and he was like bummed out he couldn't make it. But we'll absolutely do this again, because I didn't even cover half the questions that I had written out. So
Yeah, we could do a part 2 for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Set it up for the sequel.
Yeah, 100%.
Wonderful. And thank you all for listening and watching. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time.